They're digging into the ocean floor already. You have 90 seconds, Commander. Gavon Trey stood inside the subterranean control hub beneath the Andes, bare hands planted against the surface of the steel-plated command table. His gaze didn't shift to the operative who had delivered the update. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on the aerial projection of Earth's Pacific Ring of Fire. Red glyphs bled across tectonic fault lines as scar drones burrowed into volcanic ridges off the coast of Indonesia. The room pulsed with updates. Operators barked coordinates. Atmospheric interference cracked through encrypted audio channels. Somewhere far above, Earth's satellites blinked and failed. Each one a dying eye severed from orbit. No fleet movement, still in Martian orbit, spherical hold. Another officer called from the West Console. Trey's jaw clenched. Overlay scar field symmetry, match against Terran relay fall-off points. The heads-up wall flared with green arcs and burn-yellow fault sectors. Trey finally looked, just once. The grid was a noose, a seamless entrapment net cast around Earth's high orbit. The scar had formed it with deliberate geometry. Every vessel locked in position, no blind angle, no wasted deployment. It was surgical. The operative who had spoken first swallowed hard. They've begun dropping extractors over Sumatra. We're getting seismic distortion in the Indian Trench. Sir, people are watching this in real time. Trey stepped back from the table. Kill all outbound civilian feeds. Everything. Cut Earthside relay traffic. Make the screens go dark. A murmur rippled through the chamber, but no one hesitated. Within moments, regional feeds across the globe began freezing, mid-broadcast. News anchors stared at cameras just as the streams broke. In Tokyo, schoolchildren watching the sky saw their screens stutter and vanish. In Berlin, a weather drone streamed its last image, a growing chasm in the sea crust, lined with needle-fingered machines that hadn't come to talk. On the Andes command floor, the lights dimmed to operational amber, the overhead turbine slowed, and the surface of the war table flickered, showing Earth as a heat map, riddled with arterial wounds. Comms blackout enacted, someone confirmed. Multiple cabinet-level objections already flooding private lines. Let them flood, Trey said. His voice had weight without volume. I don't need their panic. I need their silence. The General Counsel of Earth's High Joint Commission appeared on the corner display, flickering with digital distortion. Commander Trey, I remind you, you do not have unilateral authority to initiate a planetary communication shutdown. This is a civilian planet, not a battlefield. Trey's hand curled into a fist. He leaned forward, speaking into the receiver with the tone of a man explaining gravity to a child. You want to hold a vote while the sky folds in on us? Fine. Gather your parliament, draft your objections. While you debate broadcast ethics, I'll keep them from breaching the mantle. He terminated the feed. Beneath his boots, the reinforced substructure hummed, pulsing not with threat but with readiness. The Andes grid had been buried here 30 years ago, a command labyrinth carved into the spine of the mountains, meant to operate when every satellite failed and every ally vanished. Now, it functioned alone. Trey had fought for that isolation clause when he was barely 30. Bring up all known configurations of Scarfield coordination. I want everything they've ever flown in the last 2 decades, he ordered. And initiate long-range scan on relay intervals. There's no such thing as a perfect net. Somewhere, they're binding that shield to a central ship. Already compiling, one of the tacticians replied. Sir? What if it's not here to orbit? What if this is a platform for atmospheric entry? Trey looked up at the suspended model of the Scar formation, a gleaming cage with a planetary shadow beneath it. Then they've underestimated the depth of our roots. Far above, just past the shroud of disabled satellites, Earth's exosphere shimmered under the Scar blockade. 50 warships, matte black and angular, maintained their orbital geometry with surgical stillness. They did not announce themselves. They needed no introduction. Their particle lances remained cold, yet calibrated. Their shields absorbed the sun's glare like it was heat from a dying match. Beneath them, Earth trembled. Commander, an aide whispered, lowering a data pad to the console. They've issued a global demand, translated automatically. It's a single sentence. Trey didn't look up. Let me hear it. The aide pressed play. Your crust contains what we need. Stand down or be reduced to ash. Trey turned away from the table and walked toward the rear platform. Glasses of untouched water sat abandoned near a diagnostics rail. He picked one up, drank once, then faced the command room again. Get me the probe data from Sector 12 of the asteroid belt, the deep shadow coordinates. You mean the classified entanglement grid? Someone asked quietly. Trey nodded. That's where we begin. The operator hesitated. Sir, those relays haven't been touched in 13 years. That's why they'll work. The eastern wall flashed again, this time a live seismic report. The SCAR drones had triggered a fault line between Java and New Guinea. The readings suggested a forced pressure reroute, not a detonation. Controlled redirection of tectonic stress, likely to aid mineral harvesting. They're not just mining, someone whispered. They're engineering the crust. Then we don't have the luxury of announcement, Trey replied. His hand moved across the console. Commands streamed like rivers through steel veins. We move in the dark, or we don't move at all. Across the globe, chaos reigned in silence. Cities roared without answers. Satellites blinked away. SCAR formations hovered with unshifting menace. Earth's skies had no defenders. Yet inside the mountain beneath stone and steel, a man built his countermeasure. Not with speeches, but with action layered in logic and readiness. Commander Trey, the relay officer called from the far side. Relay grid pings confirmed. They're active. We can retrieve the SCAR's internal comm pattern. Trey gave the first nod he'd given in hours. Begin decoding and tell Captain Voss to ready the frigates. Launch order, sir. Trey stared at the projection of Earth, now gripped by steel, orbit, and volcanic excavation. Not yet. Let them keep watching the planet. Ours will arrive from elsewhere. The room's temperature had dropped 3 degrees since the blackout began, but no one mentioned it. Trey's orders had turned the command floor into a sealed vault of movement and breath. Only the intermittent taps of data transfer keys, the scrape of boots against anti-slip flooring, and the dry hiss of oxygen regulators marked time. Relay network responding, the system's lead confirmed, adjusting a control lens embedded into the east table. 12 nodes still operational, power draw nominal, quantum linkages holding. We're pulling stream from their internal command chatter. Trey stood at the head of the room again, one sleeve rolled to the elbow, revealing a faded scar running along the ridge of his forearm. His hand hovered above the control interface without touching it, reading the staggered bursts of SCAR signal trails sketched across the board in arcs of cyan. They're coordinating from a central control vessel, said the comms officer, without lifting his eyes from the decryption grid. All fleet shielding, mining drone responses, atmospheric scan relays. It's not distributed. It's tethered. One spine. Can we isolate which ship? Trey asked. The signal latency drops to near zero from quadrant 5 of their net. Command ship has to be there. Trey's eyes narrowed. Mark the sector. A new halo pulsed in crimson over the outer Martian corridor. The system parsed it against known SCAR-ship classes. Nothing matched. It wasn't in any database. The model's shape defied typical configurations. Sleek but irregular. Elongated at the aft, with nested emission coils unlike any seen before. Still, the broadcast strength made one thing certain. That's their anchor, Trey muttered. Cut it, and everything downstream flickers. Relay 3 is dropping, another technician warned. Power drain increasing. Trey turned. Switch load to 9. Let the third burn out. Just keep the data flowing. A hiss of sparks jumped across the board as the third relay signal vanished into static. Somewhere in the outer asteroid field, one of Earth's oldest devices had just overloaded and failed. No sound marked its end. Just a line of unreadable static on the board, replaced by the continued data stream from its siblings. He stepped back as the senior encryption officer approached, dragging a multi-layered input stack filled with parsed lines of alien syntax. We're in, sir. Their shield synchronization relies on rolling pulse modulation. One error in sequence and the shield fails to regenerate in full coverage. They depend on uninterrupted pulse from that command vessel. Trey pointed at the pattern. Where's the interval delay? Right here. The officer jabbed a finger against the feed. Once every 91 seconds, it cycles, reset. That's your opening. The commander turned toward the rear entrance, just as the sealed blast door unlatched with a mechanical hiss and admitted a man built like he'd grown in the skeleton of a warship. Captain Rylan Voss entered without greeting. Dust from Earth's lunar transfer dock still clung to his shoulders. His uniform collar wasn't fastened. His boots were scratched raw from near vacuum deck plating. He didn't look like he belonged in a command center. He looked like he'd walked out of a wreck and hadn't forgotten it. Trey crossed the room and met him halfway. 10 ships, Trey said. Stealth-fitted. Pattern run through Sector 12. You'll fly behind the belt's debris arcs. No engagement unless intercepted. You reach Quadrant 5 and plant charges on every comm relay we've pinpointed. No closer than 3,000 meters to their fleet line. You cut their coordination spine. Voss didn't blink. We still running blackout? Yeah. You know this'll cost me 2 ships, maybe 3. I'm counting on it, Trey replied. It'll make the rest harder to track. Voss paused, glanced at the quantum stream flickering behind them. The alien language scrolled with indifferent complexity, uninterested in the lives it threatened. Who else knows? Voss asked. To this room. No Earthside approval? Trey shook his head once. They're still arguing over whether to hold a public briefing. A wry breath passed through Voss's teeth. Tell them we'll send flowers. He turned toward the data console. His second in command, already watching from the perimeter, handed him the covert flight vector. No more than 3 minutes passed before the full infiltration route was adjusted and locked. Trey walked with him toward the departure shaft. Once the charges are planted, get clear. When it goes down, you'll have 40 minutes before they reorient. That's when we launch. Voss pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner. The panel clicked green. I'll leave them blind. You just make sure we're not too late getting in. As Voss stepped into the launch corridor, his voice echoed once more. You still write it all down after, Commander? Trey met his eyes. Only the parts worth remembering. Voss gave a single nod, then vanished into the transport tube, with the blunt efficiency of a man who didn't believe in second chances. Behind Trey, the command board shifted again. The Indonesian trench had widened. Mineral plumes burst from the seafloor, sending vapor streams into the upper water column. The SCAR were accelerating. The diplomatic link came alive once more, Earth's Joint Council blinking into view. Commander Trey, one of the representatives said, his face too smooth, suit too clean. We've convened. The Council demands an immediate response. Either move the fleet or surrender our rights to planetary defense. Trey didn't look at the feed. He stared at the relay map. It showed 10 ships moving silently into darkness, toward coordinates so distant they barely qualified as part of Earth's domain. I've already responded, he said. He ended the call. Prepare lunar launch bays for heat damp run. Begin engine cooldowns for the railgun carriers. Inform the West Chamber to recalibrate for EMP loadouts. One of the junior techs looked up. All that for when? Trey stepped to the edge of the command table and ran a hand across the new vector trace left by Voss's squad. When they lose their tether, he said, we cut in from the dark side. The launch clamps hissed open one by one as Captain Rylan Voss stepped through the hangar pressure lock, his boots scraping against frost-laced flooring that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. The 10 frigates assigned to Operation Threadfall waited in staggered formation. Matte hulls dusted with shielding flakes from storage vaults that lined the asteroid belt's inner rim. Each ship bore no markings, no identifiers. Just darkened armor panels layered with adaptive cloaks designed to scatter any form of directed scan. They were ghosts, built to move, without making memory. 2 minutes to release, his operations officer called from inside the docking corridor. All drive cores sync to delay cycle, will be unreadable till we breach orbit. Voss adjusted the strap of his reinforced harness. The collar of his field suit pressed against his jaw, stiff with old salt from previous deployments. Cut nav relay sync to Earth Command, he said. From here on, we don't exist. The crew acknowledged in silence, toggling off the final link to the Andes command vault. From this point forward, Trey couldn't guide them, couldn't correct their angle, couldn't call them back. The fleet had to vanish not just from enemy eyes, but from Earth's as well. Voss pulled himself up the central ladder into the lead frigate, Wraith 9, gripping each rung like he was scaling out of his own grave. He passed the auxiliary weapons locker, where anti-sensor flares and microcharge beacons were strapped in foam casings. The entire interior of the vessel was darkened, stripped of anything non-essential. Lights operated at minimal lumen, floor panels insulated against collision echo. Even breathing felt heavier, like the walls themselves were warning him not to speak too loud. At the helm, his navigation chief gave a low nod. Course uploaded. We'll be threading debris trails between sectors 12 through 15. Estimated shield encounter window is 6 hours. We'll be in range by then. Any external radiation pockets? Belt flares clean. We'll coast blind through the chaff lanes. Decoys are en route to Venus sector. Launch sequence began 15 minutes ago from the orbital junkyard. Voss reviewed the display. A row of masked trajectories fanned out near Venus's eastern orbital band. Dozens of decommissioned satellites and scavenged hulls had been reassembled to simulate heat blooms and electromagnetic emissions. From a distance, they'd look like Earth's main fleet positioning for a forward assault. They'll scan it before they believe it. Let's hope that buys us time. He glanced at the chrono. Take us off anchor. Thrusters whispered as the 10 ships released from their dock braces and rotated silently into formation. No flare of heat, no signal burst, just a quiet drift into the dark veins of the asteroid field. Each frigate engaged their hull diffusers. Panels along the sides shifted with magnetized fluttering, blending into the raw stone and frozen drift of the belt. Shadows moved with them, but none outpaced. Back in the Scar orbital formation, one of their lower-tier interceptors pinged the Venus sector. A single pulse, barely detectable, triggered their long-range scope. Energy blooms near Venus lit up their mid-spectrum grid. To the Scar, it resembled engine surge, indicative of a launch group preparing to breach. First anomaly confirmed, Voss's nav chief whispered. They're repositioning Tier 4 ships. Slight reconfiguration. They're watching the wrong side of the sun, Voss muttered. Let's hope they blink late. As the ships closed in on the relay markers, the asteroid belt thickened. Jagged fragments spiraled in erratic orbits. Debris from ancient comet collisions, fractured mining wrecks from the pre-war solar era, and glassed rock slabs the size of arcologies drifted like a graveyard of failed industry. Each fragment carried its own rhythm, its own orbit decay, 1,000 trajectories threatening to break against the hull if misjudged by a degree. Voss stayed standing. No commander led from a chair. He gripped the rail beside his helm officer, eyes fixed on the readout as Wraith 9 narrowed its approach angle toward the first communication relay node. Target in range, the tactical specialist said. 200 meters, shielded, low emission, ready to mount payload. Voss exhaled through his nose. Send the drone. A silent crate slid through the lower hatch. The drone, no larger than a man's torso, unfolded once outside and magnetized itself to a nearby asteroid shard before drifting toward the Scar-Com relay. Its casing mirrored surrounding space detritus. Slowed movement, irregular spins, jagged reflective surfaces. 3 minutes passed. Charge planted. Move us, Voss ordered. Next vector. One by one, 9 more payloads were deployed, each along a Scar subchannel node. These weren't explosive enough to destroy the hardware. They were tailored to rupture synchronization, induce timing lag, and flood the signal stream with false modulation echoes, enough to sever command authority without alerting Scar diagnostics until it was too late. By the 7th deployment, the asteroid field had grown tighter. Friction sensors started chirping warnings from ventral hulls. Their ships skimmed between fragments narrower than their own wingspans. Voss's ship scraped once. A brittle groan echoed through the superstructure as a shard the size of a cargo hauler kissed their portside stabilizer. Damage? Cosmetic. Shield intact. Keep going. Then came the pause. The relay technician's fingers froze on the console. Sir? Scarnet just hesitated. 1.6 seconds of delay in Quadrant 5, no signal correction. Voss leaned in. He felt it. They're adjusting formation. 5 of their ships just flared heat sinks, dumping excess. Reactionary. Voss looked over his shoulder at the long-range chart. Earth remained invisible. No Terran vessel had moved. No launch had breached atmosphere. Trey was still holding. Let's give them no reason to fix their eyes back here. He keyed into the fleet comm. All ships maintain comm silence. Final charge, then we drift. No acceleration. Let them hunt ghosts near Venus. As the final payload was placed, Voss checked the time. 3 hours and 27 minutes since departure. The asteroid belt swallowed the fleet again. 10 ships now scattered themselves along natural orbital shadows, power systems idling, core emissions muted to background stellar levels. Like forgotten husks, adrift. From the outside, they were just more wrecks, lost in the silence of old warfields. But inside them, fingers hovered over triggers. The only breath anyone heard was their own. The countdown crossed 0. A distant blip from the Andes command vault triggered the detonation sequence embedded across the asteroid belt. From 10 separate coordinates, the disruption charges activated in sequence, each emitting a calibrated burst of energy that fractured the SCAR's relay grid in less than 7 seconds. In orbit above Mars, the enemy fleet convulsed. Ships that had maintained geometric discipline drifted out of formation. Shield arcs sputtered. Target locks on Earth's surface flickered out, then reappeared in random sweeps. Mining drones, mid-separationed along the Java Trench, froze in place. Carving rigs motionless, their arms suspended inches above molten fault lines. Inside the Earth Command Center, the overhead display panels rippled with captured telemetry. The synchronization interval of the SCAR fleet, once a perfect waveform, now fractured into jagged, competing pulses. The data translated into a timeline at the base of the board. Disruption window. 40 minutes. Run the solar clock, Trey said. A junior officer keyed in the flare schedule. Solar output surged as expected. The upper band of solar radiation was climbing, accelerating, into a Class B flare, just enough to spike noise across the solar system's core comm layer. Shield us from their sideband tracking. We've got about 6 minutes of spectral cover before their deep sensors punch through. Trey moved to the central control rail. Deploy from the lunar bays, all wings. Activate Colt flight vectors. Keep railguns offline until we hit mid-burn. The operator nodded without looking back. Lunar bays unlocking now. Doors bleeding pressure. Railgun vessels disengaging. Clamps. Far across the dark side of the moon, hangar silos opened like the lids of sleeping weapons. Earth's fleet, 30 ships, unfolded in orchestrated silence. From below, they had never existed. Buried in regolith, insulated from orbital detection, they rose without signal, without burn signatures. Each vessel moved on thermal drift, sails deployed to catch the minor push of solar particles. Once past the moon's terminator line, they would engage. Until then, they were fragments of debris, coasting between radiation spikes. Inside the lead cruiser Defiant, Trey stood at the forward command rail. The ship's interior was bare, no comfort or curve, just steel walls traced with hand-sewn flag insignias from the pre-fleet nations. Every crew member had drilled for this maneuver 46 times in simulation. Each step, each check, was carried out with the kind of care a surgeon reserved for damaged nerve. At 6 minutes and 30 seconds into the flare burst, Trey gave the next order. Railgun cores to half, EMP ordnance cold-armed, continue solar masking, fire at minimum draw until breach threshold. Onboard systems began routing charge to the spinal cannons. Long shafts coiled with magnetically confined mass drivers. Each shot would accelerate tungsten rods the size of commuter trains across battlefield distances as the kinetic strike strong enough to core a cruiser. Flight command, Trey said, voice firm but never raised. Initiate echo thread. An uplink bounced from Defiant to the satellite shell left floating near Jupiter months ago. The satellite, an empty husk, meant only to receive command signal. Translated the echo back through the SCAR network via the quantum relay exploit. The signal mimicked the SCAR fleet's own internal comms, broadcasting from the false node. On the enemy display, a direct order was issued. Half the fleet was instructed to break orbit and redeploy to intercept a phantom Earth armada forming behind Jupiter. 16 SCAR vessels complied. Their angle shifted, engines ignited. The orbital net that had threatened Earth like a constricting coil opened slightly, allowing Earth's fleet a path to slide forward. "We took the bait," the sensor chief confirmed. "They're splitting." Trey exhaled. "Fire all EMP loadouts. Give them eyes full of ash." From Earth's fleet, torpedo bays opened. Dozens of slow, flickering projectiles launched in staggered waves, each wrapped in ion disruption plating, tipped with payloads meant not to destroy, but to blind. When the first reached SCAR interceptors, localized shock waves tore through internal circuitry. Particle lances overloaded. Auto-lock systems rebooted mid-turn. One ship veered into another during correction, sparking a secondary collision. On the command deck of Defiant, a low shudder passed through the floor as the railguns released their first barrage. In less than a heartbeat, kinetic slugs breached the weakened shielding of the nearest SCAR platform. A ruptured stabilizer spun free, trailing fragments across orbit, before catching in Earth's gravity and burning on re-entry. Still, the fleet held course. No shift in formation, no call for acceleration. "Maintain throttle," Trey ordered. "Keep our movement masked by radiation until we clear Mars Arc." He turned to the comms lead. "Send blackout signal across all Terran networks in the South Pacific." Mining drones began to sink. Without uplink, they drifted to the ocean floor. Reduced to junk metal embedded in the trenches they had carved. Along the ridgelines of Sumatra, pressure readings returned to nominal. Volcanic instability dropped below crisis level. Back in orbit, another railgun strike struck the underbelly of a SCAR supply cruiser. The projectile passed through its payload hold and fractured its reactor housing. It did not explode. It vented. A cloud of ionized gas tore across the flank of two adjacent SCAR vessels, forcing them to disengage their shield generators to stabilize. Earth's fleet passed underneath that arc of wreckage, navigating debris fields with bone-cold intent. Next shot queued, EMP reload complete, 43 seconds to next pulse. Trey watched the battlefield unfold not as an event, but as a calculation. Each movement, each line of drift, each point of reaction had already been modeled. It was an instruction. The SCAR had demanded surrender. Earth had delivered a lesson. Defiant passed through the debris field without shedding speed. Its forward array rotated twice, locked onto SCAR Interceptor 12, and fired. The slug drilled through the vessel's forward sensor dome, then through its bridge column, and out the rear stabilizer ring. The entire ship twisted unnaturally before breaking apart like frozen bone. Chunks tumbled end over end, flickering with the last of their power discharge as the orbital drift caught them and sent them down toward Earth's upper atmosphere. "IMPACT confirmed," called the targeting officer. "SCAR response nodes not re-establishing. They're fragmented." Trey didn't reply. He watched the hologrid of Earth's upper orbit change. The once coordinated SCAR formation had fractured. Ships were veering off alignment by degrees, shield overlaps thinning. Interceptor patrol paths no longer flowed like circuitry. They pulsed in irregular loops, desperate, unstable. "Third railgun strike from Valiant successful," someone shouted from the lower console rail. "They're breaching deep hull on cruiser class 9. The battle had turned kinetic. Trey stepped up to the forward viewport as another Earth torpedo cut across space, struck a SCAR hull, and triggered a shock bloom of radiant shrapnel that glared against the black. Nothing burned. Nothing exploded. Things broke. Things tore. Armor peeled, as though gravity had returned to orbit. A proximity alert lit the upper left console. SCAR interceptor descending from orbital rear. 78 seconds to engagement. "Rotate aft guns 3 and 4. Give them the arc," Trey ordered. Defiant adjusted with a single thrust command. The vessel's twin cannons moved independently. When the SCAR ship crested the orbit line and came within targeting distance, both barrels fired. A ripple passed through the SCAR vessel's side plating as if a storm had passed directly through its core. The rear quarter folded in on itself. One wing spiraled off. The ship did not fall, it collapsed mid-maneuver. 17 confirmed destroyed, the central analyst read from his board. 8 more disabled. The bridge lighting flickered momentarily, not from damage, but from system reroutes. The number of variables had outpaced human input. The AI cores embedded in the command decks had taken partial control, mapping movement arcs, adjusting fire sequence intervals, managing launch cooldowns. Voss's squad just broke out of the belt, someone at the rear shouted. They're flanking. Route them through grid delta, Trey responded instantly. Have them drop drones. Across the battle map, 10 frigates emerged from the asteroid belt like ghosts catching light for the first time. They didn't shoot. They didn't break formation. They moved under full cloak until they reached the forward perimeter of the Scar blockade. Then, each deployed its final asset. Micro-drones burst from their bellies. Thousands of them, each the size of a man's fist, engineless, surface-textured to mimic orbital debris. Their purpose wasn't damage, it was blindness. Every drone scattered a randomized burst of censored disruption code. They didn't block signals, they multiplied them, bounced them, folded them back onto the receivers. Scar ships that attempted to scan their surroundings began receiving returns showing hundreds of duplicates. Enemy ships where there were none, fire arcs that one Scar destroyer rotated sharply, attempting to correct for what it thought was a flanking Earth cruiser. It rotated straight into the line of fire of one of its own retreating interceptors. The two collided destructively, shearing armor, venting coolant, twisting power nodes into exposed arcs. Voss's drones are live, sensors are in full flux, confirmed the system's lead. They're blind. Trey remained still. Recalibrate our targeting, manually. Ignore Scar sensor trails. Visual line only. The targeting officer adjusted their matrix. Screens reoriented to visual confirmation only. Every shot fired now was on eye-read arcs and telemetry math. Earth's gunners didn't miss. One by one, railgun slugs hammered into Scar cruisers. Hull after hull fractured under the weight of impact. The Scar shielding, once impervious, now flared unevenly, flickering where the sync pulses had broken. Ships folded open like rusted machinery kicked at the right angle. 35 confirmed downed, said the comms chief, not lifting his eyes from the board. And still Earth's fleet didn't halt. They passed through the wreckage like carving blades. Commander, Voss's voice broke through a secured line. We've taken no losses. They're spinning. Do we cut the head? Not yet, Trey replied. There's one more lesson to deliver. The fleet repositioned again, slower this time, turning in unison toward the remaining Scar vessels, still trying to reform near Mars. A deep thrum began in the spine of Defiant as the forward railguns reloaded. EMP launchers moved back into alignment. The ship's armor plating sealed tighter. Automated turrets locking back into resting cradles as the crew prepped for another sequence. Trace walked across the bridge, the way one might walk into a courtroom or a burial site. Do we have full visual on their command ship? He asked. We do. Rear starboard channel, relay line dim, reactor stable but outer hull damaged. Send the pattern, he said. Line up our strike, I want it done in one breath. He faced the viewport again. The Scar command vessel, still partially shielded, lurched sideways as its data core rebooted for the third time. Red indicators lined the vertical columns of the bridge. Crew members shouted. Their instruments no longer returned stable inputs. Target arcs shifted unpredictably. Enemy ships showed and vanished within seconds. Sensor feedback contradicted visual confirmation. Admiral Yix hunched beneath the central lay of tactile command rods, gripped the flight grip with all 4 limbs. The rings of his breathing apparatus were tight enough to dig into his lower thorax. His body braced not for impact, but revelation. This isn't noise, the auxiliary pilot shouted. They're flooding us with decoys that react to our targeting. Filter the interference. Lock by heat trail only, Yix ordered. There is no thermal pattern, Admiral. Their ships aren't bleeding power. They're flying dark past operational limit. Yix's secondary display lit with an urgent sequence. Formation breach detected. The flank corridor had been shredded. A dozen destroyers had disappeared in a coordinated arc blast minutes ago, and now their absence exposed the center of his fleet. He raised a claw and tapped the override console. Reroute Squadron 3. Collapse inward. Form battle wedge. Drive toward their command vessel. If we can crush their center, we can... The rest of his sentence never arrived. 3 Earth slugs tore through his vanguard before the bridge display could render the correction. Each hit followed a pattern. Nose cone, core segment, drive fin, like someone had traced their exact vulnerability in advance. He didn't see enemy ships fire, only the aftermath. "Admiral, they are predicting our maneuvers," said the analytics tech. "Their pattern map is folding ours before we commit. They are striking into our decisions, not our ships." Eric's froze. Then, finally, he asked the question none of them had voiced. "What are we fighting?" A comm burst tore through the bridge, an unfamiliar frequency spliced over the quantum core. Earth's hack repurposing their relay again? This time it carried a feed echoing their own targeting predictions back at them. Reversed, mirrored, accelerated. They were watching themselves lose before it happened. Back on Earth's command deck, Trey didn't blink. "Collapse prediction grid, focus on command vessel. Voss, you have strike lead." Inside Wraith 9, Voss didn't respond with protocol. He simply clicked into the manual override. His hands gripped the throttle sleeves as the ship tilted hard toward the Scar flagship. "Drone cloud clear," his weapons tech reported. "Sensor blinding is solid. You'll get 1 clean run." Voss tapped the feed lines. "Arm the coil cluster. Target rear tri-point. Skip the shell. I want bleed through." 3 charges locked into the spine rack. The frigate shook with minor thrust bursts as it closed the gap between its hull and the Scar command ship's exposed stern. The first coil launched. The arc of force it created fractured shielding on contact. Energy bled from the ship's aft like shattered crystal. Voss didn't slow. Second charge fired, this time into the exposed vent system. The command ship jerked, then tilted, caught between forced orientation and structural collapse. The third was fired directly into the core chamber plating, a silent discharge. And a ship-wide stall. Inside Urux's bridge, everything turned black. Consoles went blank. The lighting strips faded. Even the emergency override taps gave nothing. A long, low tone played once across the fallback channel, a tone not programmed into any Scar protocol. Erix looked out through the wide viewport at the Terran ships that now flanked his fleet from multiple angles, the knowledge that the crown had broken. "Our grid dead," Trey's systems officer confirmed. "Command signal is offline, no further relay traffic." Trey turned from the viewport and said calmly, "Finish the arc, leave the rest." One final volley left Defiance forward battery, targeted not at ships but relay pylons and support towers still attempting to link broken command signals together. The volley hit with surgical placement. Relay after relay shattered, turning into drifting junk. Around the broken Scar command ship, 15 vessels floated uncoordinated. A few tried to form ranks. Others turned away completely. One lit its drive engine, hesitated, then vanished into hyperspace. The others followed. Simply fled in scattered angles, destination irrelevant. Voss watched them go from his viewport. "They're not retreating," he said. "They're escaping." Back on Earth's orbital band, the mining drones drifted like loose scaffolding. Their last orders had cut off. Their hulls bore the markings of the Scar Dominion, but they no longer belonged to anything. Detached, rootless, empty. Trey turned to his bridge crew. "Stand down combat operations, mark the timestamp, inform all sectors the sky is cleared." The lights in the command center shifted from combat mode to operational status. A few officers looked to one another, expecting applause. None came. The war hadn't ended with a speech. It ended when the enemy's final order never arrived. The drone carcass lay open beneath floodlights in the Quito Skylab. Its outer shell, once armored to resist corrosive atmospheres, was now stripped to its internal rigging, joints pried open like dissected armor. Technicians in vacuum-hardened suits circled it with scanners and nano-fracture tools. The machine had stopped moving the moment the command signal died, but even now, it carried a dormant threat. Embedded Scar protocols were rigged to self-immolate if touched incorrectly. Earth's teams had learned this by losing 2 hands and 1 orbital scaffold before adapting. Voss stood on the raised walkway overlooking the lab floor, arms folded behind his back. One of the lead engineers approached him, wiping dust from his gloves. "We've cracked their override gate," he said. Turns out their control signal was built around rotational entropy loops, not encryption. We just had to build a matching decay sequence. They didn't design for interception, only domination. "Will it hold?" Voss asked without turning. "Already does," the man replied, voice flat. "We've reprogrammed 14. 8 are in motion, laying anchors along the orbital band. We're turning their excavation drones into construction frames. Fastest grid we've ever laid." Voss looked upward. Through the transparent ceiling, the Earth's lower orbit gleamed with scattered lights. Some were Earth ships, others retrofitted scar shells, repainted, reclassified, functional. The new orbital defense lattice was beginning to take shape, not as a wall, but a net. An early warning grid woven from enemy pieces. "Keep the replication core isolated," Voss said. "Last thing I want is one of those things thinking it still serves their chain of command." He descended the walkway. The boots of his suit made a hard sound on the steel. Outside, wind rolled against the outer hull with a low whistle. Quito hadn't seen combat, but it had become the keystone for Earth's rebuild strategy. Its elevation, atmospheric access, and proximity to the Andes command vault made it a natural bridge between surface and sky. The Andes command vault was quiet. Trey's office sat with the door cracked open. Inside, 2 officers carried out the last of the personal effects. 1 coat, a few data pads, a paper map of Mars from the early colonization days. Voss entered without fanfare. The command table in the center was powered down. No feeds, no projections, just cold glass and a single folded letter, unsealed. Voss read it once. No farewell. Just 5 lines of instructions regarding the orbital doctrine, deployment schedule, and a short sentence at the end. This was never mine to keep. He folded the note and placed it in his chest pocket. The council chambers above had already ratified the transition. Earth's newly unified Planetary Defense Committee, a mixture of surviving state alliances, corporate stabilization boards, and orbital logistics unions, had signed off on Voss's appointment unanimously. There was the restructuring of alert codes and the quiet redirection of command authority to his channel. Voss exited the office, turned right, and walked the corridor until he reached the overlooked chamber. The same room where Trey had first activated the quantum relay strategy. The panels were active again, this time not for war, but construction. Along the orbital feed, he tracked the current deployment path of repurposed SCAR drones. They moved along designated arcs, laying beams between relay towers, forming new tracking corridors. They no longer harvested Earth, they guarded it. One of the communications techs approached quietly. "Sir, we've finished decoding the full SCAR fleet transmission history. It's available for review." "Anything of note?" Ebel referred to Earth as a tier null resource target. Voss raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Not worth colonizing, only stripping." The comms tech waited for an answer. Voss gave none. He returned his eyes to the orbital screen. At the bottom corner, a new build zone flickered into place. 6 SCAR district support rings positioned around Earth's equator, each wired with energy reservoirs, shield projectors, and communication enhancers. They were not designed for aggression. They were deterrence. A hand tapped lightly on the entry frame behind him. General Stykes, former lead of the Asia-Pacific Fleet, entered with the data. "The Southern Blocs finally ratified the doctrine," he said. "Every nation on board, defense and oversight merged. Planetary security is no longer segmented." Voss took the pad and skimmed it. "About time," he muttered. "We can't do this again. Next time, they won't wait to strip the crust." Stykes gave a low breath. "You still keeping the quantum relays online?" "Yes, but they're being relocated. We'll seed them deeper into the belt, and 1 series goes to Europa orbit. We'll keep listening, quietly." Outside the station, new ships passed beneath them. Earth's, but newer in shape. Sleek, less ornamented, built for continuity. Their hulls bore no names yet. Those would come later. Trey's chair remained empty in the vault below. No replacement had been assigned. Voss refused to occupy it. He'd command from the grid, not from a vault. The first frame of footage opened with a blank screen and a date. The raw timestamp and an unaltered orbital feed. 50 alien ships forming a containment ring around Earth. Scar vessels etched in silence, framed against a planet that hadn't moved. The camera shook slightly as the feed shifted to a high-orbit relay, catching the launch of Earth's fleet. 30 ships rising not from atmosphere but from shadow. Then came the moment. The Scar vessel blinked from the feed entirely. 1 second there, next second gone, not turned or damaged. Deleted. The railgun slug wasn't shown, only the void it left. The footage transitioned quickly. 8 seconds of orbital wreckage spinning across frame, another 10 of a Scar drone severed mid-joint by an Earth-framed torpedo strike. Then a flash cut to the command ship's collapse. The angle captured from Voss's Wraith 9, sharp and angled, like a knife descending at a table no one saw. Trey had commissioned the edit before stepping down. He gave no speech. He left behind one instruction to the team handling the media curation. Make them understand we never shouted. We simply arrived. The feed, once published, spread through every Earth-linked satellite node. It was pulled down within 40 minutes on 2 outer rim syndicates. Scarbelly broadcasters refused to host it. That didn't matter. It reached the public anyway. Across orbital platforms, border colonies, and fringe stations, the recording was dissected frame by frame. Observers expected flair, commentary, victory chants. They found none. The quiet, unembellished efficiency of the footage didn't feel like propaganda. It felt like warning. On Arcos Prime, an independent Federation council convened to update threat levels. Earth, once tagged as a non-expansionary species, was moved to Tier 3 autonomous aggressor. A designation reserved for civilizations with offensive capacity, strategic asymmetry, and unpredictability in engagement scope. Was the same tier held by the Ovrak Collective and the Navarre Siegeborn. The footage didn't show Earth's numbers, it showed their choice. They hadn't waited for the storm. They had built it in orbit. Inside the diplomatic chamber at Earth's Polar Intake Center, 2 Scar envoys stood beneath the high lamplight. Both wore environmental regulators, skins dulled by artificial gravity adjustments. Their convoy had arrived unannounced, their ship docking without escort. They carried no formal titles, only terms. Boss reviewed the document they placed on the table. It wasn't long. 6 pages in Scar code. Translated into Terran Common by quantum keys Trey had embedded into the Scar systems during the Relay War. The terms were blunt. No further claim to Earth's crustal regions. No drone deployment within Sol's orbital plane. Cease extraction from all shared belts. Earth. Immediate Scar withdrawal from surrounding mining routes. Official recognition of Earth's independent defense doctrine. Voss looked up at the shorter envoy. You don't want war, say it plainly. The envoy tapped the table twice. Your planet has taught us that loss can come before identification. He nodded once, then turned to the secondary page, an encoded request to formalize mutual observation rights through shared satellite platforms. Essentially, they wanted to watch Earth more closely, now that they'd failed to predict it. You came from minerals, Voss said, sliding the datapad back. Next time, send a request, not a fleet. They left without speaking again. Within 3 days, Earth's orbital feed registered the final Scar vessel exiting Sol's outer edge. They didn't look back. Trey, now off-grid and unreachable, had left behind one final asset, a deep-core relay, embedded into a communications pylon on Europa's 3rd surface arc. Its transmission was locked to one file. Uncut camera feeds from the battle, and footage showing Earth's approach vector in full. That was the version the Galactic Archives received. The same footage eventually landed on Eliran ComNet, a system-wide information net for one of the 5 central hubs in the assembly. Within 24 hours, the phrase, "didn't broadcast before arrival," became a political reference point. Councils whispered it behind closed doors, traders spread it in coded jokes, military analysts used it in scenario modeling. No one on Earth acknowledged the shift publicly. No statements were released. No Earth official granted interviews. But the orbit changed. Earth's defense net doubled in 32 days. Rebuilt SCAR drones now circled the equator, forming tripwire corridors between low orbit and geosync bands. Each carried an active identifier with a nameplate, Interceptor of Initial Mistake. Ships from Mars, Ceres, and Titan were rerouted for clearance protocols before entry. A new doctrine passed under Voss's authority required every inbound vessel to ping for clearance 3 planetary turns before arrival. Trey's former chair remained vacant in Andy's command. A bronze ring was placed behind it. 3 concentric circles etched into the alloy, each symbolizing one phase of the war: blockade, breach, broadcast. No ceremony marked its installation. Back in Quito, Earth's final encoded message was uploaded to the galactic grid. It contained a single loop of the feed, showing Earth's fleet rising.